website. They allow dogs here. I also hear that they give away free coffee and beer, unlimited. So pretty good. And thank you, Deb, for participating in this. So this is our first candidate conversation series. As Tom said, we're going to be interviewing several other candidates. You should check out our website, phillymag.com, for more details. But for tonight, let me tell you a little bit more about Doug Oliver. He was most recently the Senior Vice President for Marketing and Corporate Communications at Philadelphia Gas Works. Before that, he was Mayor's Press Secretary. At 40 years old, he is by far the youngest mayoral candidate in the race. And he's got some notable strengths. He gave what I think was one of the best speeches of the mayoral campaign so far. Ed Rendell is also talking him up, calling him enthusiastic and energetic, and he even floated the possibility of maybe, just maybe, endorsing him, which is pretty crazy. He's also arguably got some serious weaknesses. He doesn't have much of a public record because he's never held elected office before, and at the end of 2014, his exploratory mayoral committee only had $1,000 in the bank. So the question is, does Doug Oliver have what it takes to be in the big leagues? I'll try to find it out tonight. As Tom said, I'll be asking about 30 minutes of questions. Each question, Doug will have about 2 minutes to answer. I'll try to hold him to that. And then afterwards, we'll be taking questions from the audience. You should see pieces of paper on your seats. You can write them down, and then we'll select the best 4 or 5. Okay, so let's get started. One of the things we're trying to do with the Candidate Conversation series is get to know the candidates on a more intimate level than you might be able to do at some of the forums that we're going to see in the city. There's going to be tons of those. We don't know too much about you, especially compared to the other candidates in the race who have much longer public records, years and even decades of public records. So I'm going to start with some biographical questions. You said that you grew up poor in Germantown in the 1980s, just as the crack cocaine epidemic was getting started. You told Newsworks that 10-year-olds shouldn't have to negotiate the things I had to negotiate as a 10-year-old. What were some of those things?
Thank you. When I was talking to Newsworks, I was reflecting on my time at Pickett Middle School. And this is Pickett Middle School before it became Mastery Charter at Pickett campus. They made it sound a lot nicer than what I remember. Anybody who's ever been in Wayne and Shelton, that intersection, it looks at that school, it looks a lot like a penitentiary. And as far as I was concerned at that time, it's exactly what they were training me for. Even down to the yard that everybody scared everybody so much. At that time, before I'd gone to Pickett Middle School, I attended Cedar Grove Christian Academy, High Street Christian Academy, Greenfield Elementary, and I played the trumpet. I had exposure to arts and culture. But when I got to that school, I realized that all of those things were frowned upon. Not only did they not offer them in abundance, they did have a band, but most of the kids there didn't appreciate it. When they stole my trumpet, I thought they stole it because they wanted to play it. And I realized they stole it because they wanted to break it, which means they didn't understand it. And as a 10-year-old, I do what we all do at work every day. When we don't fit in, we try and figure out how to fit in. For me, that meant stopping playing the trumpet. And the same thing occurred with grades. When I got an A and everyone else got C's, D's, and F's, and I got in trouble in the schoolyard, what I started to do was just underperform, just so I fit with everybody, or to get smarter and ask the teacher to put the average grade that everyone else had on my paper and put my real grade on the back so I could give it to my mom. Again, nobody should have to think about all of that stuff at age 10. But for me, it was a public safety issue. It was an arts and culture issue. It was a vision issue. It was exposure to things that make us all productive in life. And I was trying to figure that out before I even got out of the 5th grade. And that's what I was talking about.
So how did you go from being that kid to then studying journalism at Lock Haven University? You could have become another statistic pretty easily.
That's true. My escape route was Milton Hershey School, Hershey, Pennsylvania. After I left Pickett, again, my mom was making a lot of these choices for me, and after 5th grade there, we found our way to Hill Freeman. And then when I graduated from there in the 8th grade, I was either to Germantown, my neighborhood school, but I think I got accepted into engineering and science. So that's where I really wanted to go, but then the opportunity to attend Milton Hershey School came along. I didn't want to go because it sounded like being carted off, but my mom saw it as an opportunity, and I'm so glad that, you know, she had more vision than I did at that time. I got to Milton Hershey School, and instantly my teachers, my home life, my mom, my coaches, everybody was focused on making me successful. So there was alignment across all fronts. There was access to technology, there was access to just people who cared about me. And anybody who's ever been in the Hershey area, you see the school, you see what it does for disadvantaged kids all over the state. And they took care of it. And then from there, it was just simple. I went to Lock Haven University, returned here to Philadelphia for a master's in LaSalle and MBA.
So education, which is a
hands down, it was
great topic in this mayor's race.
It is.
It's convenient that happens.
It's not convenient. It is the truth that nobody's going to move. I mean, we are seeing two cultures. One is the affluent and one is the disadvantaged. And there's no way that you move from one to the other without education. So for me, it was certainly a life experience, but I was lucky. And you shouldn't have to be lucky to find your way out. Now, Hershey won't accept every disadvantaged kid. Everybody in Philadelphia is probably eligible for Milton Hershey School. They just can't do it all. So the idea that you have to be lucky with your education, even the term lottery, just doesn't make sense to me. There should be a guarantee of a basic education. That's one of the fundamental roles of government. And I think we have to get back to that if we expect to be the city that's not only world-class, but grows and continues to grow.
I want to ask you a few questions about your campaign and why you want to do this. You've never held elected office before, and most of your career has been in communications. Are you really qualified to run the 5th biggest city in the country?
I do. My career began with journalism, mass communication. My first job was at Beach Advertising. And at that agency, I got a chance to apply communication skills to any number of different businesses, some retail, some government. One of the clients that we had at that time was John White Jr. for mayor. So it was the first time I got to see political communication. But I quickly learned that to be good at communication, you have to understand business. You can't see the hand grenade rolling down the hallway if you don't understand the balance sheet, the income statements. And so going back to school to get my MBA was part of me trying to secure a communication background and give it the substance of business. Politics just happened by accident. It just so happened that my work as press secretary at the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare, or at Philadelphia Gas Works, or at the mayor's office was all political. Sitting as press secretary for the mayor, you are in the front seat of the roller coaster. No, you are not the elected official, but you certainly see and hear and are privy to all of the conversations and the backroom dealings, the things that make a city successful and the things that make a city unsuccessful. I think these life experiences have groomed me for leadership, because when we look at a mayor, what a mayor has to be, he's not the guy who knows everything. He's certainly not necessarily the one with the longest legislative record. There's a difference between a record and a good record. And at the end of the day, a mayor is a vision setter, a team builder, a communicator, as we've seen, and a cheerleader. And again, my field, my career path is, I think, trained me in all of those things.
You could have beefed up your resume, though. You could have run for city council and state rep, gotten a bit of a public record under your belt. Why are you running for mayor now in 2015?
Well, I think we have a lot to go on if we look back at mayors who came from the legislative body or from elected office. There's no shortage. I don't know why people think that being in city council beefs up the resume. I think I'm personally impressed with my resume. I don't know how I got there. A little bit of luck, a little bit of preparation, as they say. You know, the intersection of luck and preparation is opportunity is the definition. I messed that one up. Please forgive me. I'm proud of my resume. I think it speaks for itself, and I didn't ever believe that running for city council is something that you should do if you don't want to be a city councilman. It shouldn't be a stepping stone for mayor. It shouldn't be a stepping stone for anything. There's a difference between the legislative, judicial, and executive branch of government, as we all learned in Civics 101, and saying, why don't you run for city councilman? I said, why don't you run for judge? I don't want to be. It's not my training. And my experience has been more on the executive side. And so I thought that those things lent themselves well to the mayor's office. And lastly, I'll say, before I'm quiet on this particular question, is that I think it's time that we tried something different. just a different perspective, a new set of eyes, and whether that perspective is different because I'm younger, whether that perspective is different because I approach the problems differently or a different personality, all of those things count for something. And we've said in almost every press outlet in the city, why do we keep getting the same old things? And I venture forth that is because we keep doing the same old things.
Next one. Sometimes people run for office, not necessarily to gain that particular office at that particular time, but to get name recognition and then run for office, maybe for city council or state rep, or maybe for mayor again in a few years. Is that what you're doing?
No, that certainly wasn't the case. And I recognize that that is the case. So many people have asked, are you running to win, or are you running to place, are you running for a good job? And I say back to them, I left a good job, not to get a good job. I left my job so that I could pursue the office of mayor. The idea that it's the first step towards running again in the future, I quite honestly haven't made any decisions about the future, because part of the reason I'm running now is because I think now is the time. I think now is where the need is. With 50,000 new Philadelphians under the age of 30, with 300, this is just an election statistic, with some 325,000 voters between the ages of 25 and 45, up to 411,000 if you're talking about people over the age of 18 registered voters. Now is the time for a different perspective. And quite honestly, I still believe that I understand what an 18-year-old just coming out of school is thinking. Certainly when you're fresh out of college and you want to take the world by the horns, I understand that feeling. Having people talk down to you and call you too young because you're 40 after you bought a house, you started a business, you're raising families, you're paying taxes, you can go to war. All of these things make full-grown adults, and I understand that this generation of leaders in Philadelphia need to be viewed as leaders now, not leaders sometime down the line after they've become older. And so 8 years from now, I'll be 48 years old, and I'll be 8 years removed from the average age of Philadelphia, which is right now, age 33. I don't know that I'm gonna be the guy with the fresh ideas when I'm 48, because guess what? There could be somebody who's 40, somebody who's 35 who has a better claim to those things. And if he or she can speak to the interests of our city and help create a path for us to be successful and to continue to grow, then maybe I'll just support them. Again, I don't look forward to my whole life being public for the next 4 years, but it is a sacrifice I'm willing to make for the city that I love.
You're running as a Democrat. You toyed with the idea of running for mayor as a Republican, and you were actually registered as a Republican. I think that smacks of opportunism, possibly, and it makes me question if you're running for mayor because of your core values or if you're just running to win. Which side are you on?
I think I'm on the side of Philadelphia, and I think it's a fair question, though. For me personally, and I don't know if it's the same for other folks in the room, you know, my core values never changed. The R or the D, it did change, but the core values never did. And I'm finding less and less of a difference between a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat. It's just not a tough decision. But what I did find is that Philadelphia is not particularly accepting of outsiders, Democrats of Republicans, or Republicans of Democrats. My entire career, from the time I was eligible to vote up until 2012, when I changed registration, was all as a Democrat. There were no Democratic circles that I couldn't find my way into. I did find, however, that there are some policies that Republicans tend to hold closer, particularly around fiscal conservatism, that resonated with me, especially for a city like Philadelphia, where I feel like we do tax a lot and we spend a lot. And I wanted to hear different perspectives, and I thought that as a personal journey, switching parties would make sense. So I wasn't thinking about running for mayor in 2012 when I became a Republican. But I will acknowledge that as I started to explore the idea, it stopped being a personal decision. It started to become, how do you present your ideas to a city that they can hear them, that they can accept them, and that they may choose you to implement them. And it didn't seem to make sense to try and do that as a Republican, especially for all the obvious reasons. And so without any sacrifice of my personal values, I switched my party back. It was a strategic move. And the question I ask folks is, does anybody think I should have done it differently?
But isn't part of the reason that you were thinking about running as a Republican was to avoid the crowded field of the Democratic primary?
There's a strategic advantage to differentiating yourself that way. That's one way of doing it, but the other way is just being 40 in a field where the average age is 62. For me, at the end of the day, I believe that from a strategic standpoint, a one-on-one race would have been a little bit easier than a crowded Democratic primary. But again, the overwhelming majority of people in Philadelphia, my family, my neighbors, folks that I talk to every day, they're Democrats. And it's already hard enough to get them to accept some of the ideas that I have for the city. And I didn't want to create another hurdle for people to have to jump over. So as I talked to a lot of strategic advisors about how to approach this, it just made sense to run. And I think there's a lot of examples of people who've done this, people that we all know and love. And so you'll see a Sam Katz switch back and forth 3, 4, 5 times. And I don't know if he's had to answer the same question, perhaps so. We had a Frank Rizzo, a Philadelphia legend, who's done that. We had a Arlen Specter, a Philadelphia legend, who's done that. And so I think in Philadelphia, it's pretty much par for the course that people will make their moves as they see fit. But I think what's important is none of my principles, not one of my principles has changed as a result of my party affiliation one way or another.
Okay, you were part of the Nutter administration. What's your honest take on how he's done as mayor?
I think Mayor Nutter's done an excellent job as our mayor. When he was elected in 2007, I was as excited for it as the rest of the city was. And I know some folks get selective memory and they say, they're frustrated about certain things. But for me, when my phone rang and he asked me to serve as his press secretary, there was no bigger honor than to be affiliated with that change that was coming to the city. I did not foresee that we were going to face the worst economic recession that the country has ever seen. But sitting here now in 2015, looking backwards, I'm so glad that he was the leader during that time, because we weren't choosing between Mayor Nutter and Lee Iacocca or Barack Obama. We were choosing between Mayor Nutter and the other people who threw their hat in the ring during that time. And yes, it was a bumpy ride. But when we look at other urban environments, they didn't fare nearly as well as Philadelphia. We were sustained during that time, and I think it took leadership. And while he doesn't have monuments and buildings to point to, I don't think there's any question that our government is more ethical. I don't think there's any question that we're on strong footing and that we're poised for the future. And I think the biggest evidence of that is when the Pope decides he wants to come to Philadelphia. He could have chosen anywhere. And when DNC decides they want to come to Philadelphia, and when Forbes has their symposium, they come to Philadelphia. These are all signs that the city is going in the right direction, and you can't talk about a city going in the right direction and not talk about Mayor Nutter for the last 7 years. So I'm proud of the work that he's done, and I hope to build on the work he's done.
It's been said that one of his greatest weaknesses, though, has been communications. That he, has presided over a low homicide rate, that he brought ethics and transparency to city government, that he did all of these great things, but that he's done a bad job of communicating it. You were his chief communications guy. Why should we elect you to be mayor? And can you explain, what went wrong there?
Hashtag curveball. Yes. I do believe that communication is a major part of leadership. And it's the reason why, as I've moved through communication field, I've always sought to become more partners with the senior most executives. And so for at least 8 of the last 11 years, I've sat at least at the cabinet level position in any organization where I've been, because it's impossible to take certain news and just turn it into a pretty PowerPoint and just deliver it. And the example I use is, if my school decides it wants to quadruple tuition and they don't tell you why, and they say, now go run tell that. Well, how do I present that without understanding why and what other alternatives there may have been? Because you have to understand how we got to a decision in order to deliver it. And so I was pleased to have been able to sit in the room when some of the decisions were made and to be able to chime in a little bit earlier. And as I've said, there are times when I've agreed with the decision, there's times when I've disagreed. When you are a press secretary, though, what you sign away is your own voice. It is not my job to offer my opinion on what I really think. My job is to represent what the mayor thinks in the best way I possibly can. It's a reason you can't hold that job forever, because it's almost impossible, at least for me, to concede your voice to someone that long. I did my best to communicate for them. But when all of a sudden you have your city budget being slashed by significant numbers because people aren't buying or selling properties or people are losing their jobs, it's just hard to make that look good because it's not good. And so, for me, being able to communicate where we are is different from making people happy about it. And so I don't expect that the city was going to jump up and down during that time, but I thought that there was a lot of outreach during that time. You'll remember that this administration was the first one to get out into the communities and have these roundtables and talk to folks and try and help them understand. And at the end of the day, nobody understood because they didn't have a job. And I totally understand that that's how folks felt. But again, looking back at the totality of his time, or at least close to the totality of his time, he's done a fantastic job. And the communication issues that I think you're referring to are, I think, more personal than they are between he and the rest of the city. I think, and I can't speak to that because I'm not he and I'm not that. I am me, and I think you made the point, though, that a good communicator would be good for the city of Philadelphia.
I agree, but I think the question is, is it you who should do that? Are you the right person?
Well, again, I'm not running against Barack Obama or Lee Iacocca. I'm running against these other folks, and I would suggest that I believe I'm the best communicator of all, but I'd also be the best mayor of them all because I have a different perspective than them all. And I believe that if the other candidates had the answers, they've also had the platform to implement those answers. So if we need a funding solution from Harrisburg, then the folks from Harrisburg should explain why we don't have a funding solution. If we need legislation to get guns off our street from Harrisburg, then the folks from Harrisburg should explain why we don't have the legislation to get guns off our street. If it's a city council legislation that's needed, then the folks on city council should explain, because the one thing that I can't do is create a record that I don't have, but the one thing they can't do is escape the record that they have. My job will be to, not on a personal level, but on the policy level, hold them accountable for the decisions they've made and the things that they've done as they hold me accountable for not having a record. And ultimately, I think it's just going to come down to whether people trust you, whether they believe you, whether they think that what you're saying is right, and if you have the moxie, the skills to get it done. And I would say that of the candidates that are running right now for this mayor's race in 2015, I trumped them all on those fronts.
But back to communications. Do you think that it was partly your fault at all that Mayor Nutter has been, criticized as having a poor communication strategy? Shouldn't you shoulder some of that?
Sure, because I was on his leadership team. I can't escape my responsibility. There were times, again, when I was in his administration that, again, I agreed with him, and sometimes I just flat out didn't. But there were also those times, quite honestly, where I didn't know what the answer was. And I'm sitting here saying, well, we're going to find out soon. And his name was the one on the door, and so it was a safe place to be. But yeah, for the things that went right, I'd like to feel like I was a part of it, at least those things in the early part of his administration. And for the things that went wrong, I'm part of it, because I was part of the brain trust that came up with the solutions. But again, I go back to one of the first answers. I'm proud of the work that was done. And I don't think being proud of the work that you've done and advancing the ball means that you got it right all day, every day. I think it means that the big picture, the city's better off when you left it than it was when you got it. And I think that he's done his part, as have mayors before them, to advance the ball, to get to the point where a 40-year-old can run for mayor of the city of Philadelphia. That's not by accident. He's attracted so many young people to the city. Our colleges and universities play a large part in that. But we have a new city, and I'm excited about the work that's done and the work that's ahead.
I want to ask you a couple questions about policy, starting with schools, the major issue of this race. The school district right now is facing an $80 million budget gap next school year. You've thrown out a few ideas about how to raise money locally, everything from selling city assets to raising taxes to asking nonprofits to chip in. But you don't have a specific plan. Shouldn't we expect someone running for mayor to have a solid proposal at this point?
No, I think what you should expect from a mayor is somebody who has the ability to negotiate the answers for those things. I could sit here, for example, and say, I'm going to raise taxes. How? If city council's not on board with that, it's just not going to happen. I could say I'm going to sell city assets. How? If city council doesn't agree, then it's not going to happen. This is the fact of the matter, that there's a lot of voices that need to be at the table when solutions are there. So what I try and do as best I can is to outline those few things that for me are non-negotiables, because everything else has to be negotiated. I don't want to put myself in a box or in handcuffs before we get to the table. I want them to know, all interested stakeholders, whether it's council or whether it's the teachers union or whether it's parents or the business community, that I will listen to you when it's time to have a conversation about what the solutions are. And so, for example, you mentioned two of the things that I'd actually consider last, which are the selling of city assets and raising taxes. There's lots of other things that we might be able to do, like leaving the city of Philadelphia open a little bit longer and using the excess revenue that comes in during those times to fund schools. Payments in lieu of taxes for some of our eds and meds that don't traditionally pay taxes, yet expand in the communities all across the city, like land developers. And there may be other ideas that I haven't considered, and I guess the signal I want to send, even starting now, is that I'm open to all of these conversations, because what's non-negotiable for me is that we don't come up with a solution. Not that it has to be mine. I have no pride of ownership. I just want to make sure that we find a solution that, to the extent possible, provides dedicated funding for our school, ideally from Harrisburg, where I think it should come from, but if not, right here in Philadelphia, figure out how to make sure we care for our kids.
Okay, Council President Darrell Clarke has recently hired a lobbyist for City Council. He also wants to change the city's charter so that the entire city government is reformulated and restructured. This suggests that he might actually be running the city in 2016 and not the new mayor. What do you think of these two changes? Do you support them?
Well, I think that a couple of things. One, city council's up for election just like the mayor's office is up for election. So we don't know what city council is going to look like in January of 2016. I mean, we can probably guess, and some are better suited than others, but there's likely to be some turnover at city council that will, just like as there is guaranteed to be turnover in the mayor's office. Our council president has always been a leader of the city. I don't think that's new. When you look at John Street as a mayor, he was a very strong city councilman. Mayor Nutter was a very strong city councilman, not a president, but a very strong city councilman. And so it's not new to have a city council that takes an active role in city government, and I certainly don't have a problem. Whether he hires a lobbyist or not to fight for Philadelphia, the only way I'd have a problem with that is if they're lobbying for, like, New York instead of Philadelphia. Like, at the end of the day, if they're out there and they're fighting for school funding, those kinds of things, then let's figure out how to make it work. And if I don't have to now spend executive branch money on that lobbyist and I can support his efforts, then who cares? So long as we have the people in Harrisburg that are pushing a Philadelphia agenda, that's what's most important to me.
But the city's founders wanted a strong mayor form of government. Are you okay with that shifting to a stronger city council form of government?
Yeah, I can't speak to that strong mayor form of government because I think there's lots of examples that it's not. What I'd say is that there are things that a mayor can do, particularly if they're not legislatively driven, that they can do without city council. The mayor can enter into contracts, he can create executive orders that set a tone for a city and set an agenda for a city. And perhaps that's what the founders meant. But, you know, there's lots of things that could have been done differently if they meant they wanted to make the mayor able to just dictate his will. That is certainly not the case. But I would argue that council can't either, because for all of the powers that council has, they can't spend money. That's an executive branch function. And I think any city that does well, and for a city like Philadelphia, council and the mayor are going to have to work together. I've never seen such a clear example of that fact than over the last 8 years or 7 years. And when we've seen the city grow by leaps and bounds, it's always been when the mayor and city council were able to find a way to get along. So what I'm mindful of is not jumping into a mayor's race by criticizing the body that I'm going to need to work with to get anything that I want to get done. And not only do I want to tell them what I want to get done, but I want to find out what they want to get done and work together. I think the city's tired of the tit for tat back and forth between city council. At the end of the day, if you're not focused on getting kids educated and getting jobs for parents and embracing entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation in a city that has so much youth and opportunity, and turning that opportunity into promise, then you're focusing on the wrong things. And so I will do the best that I can to stay away from the scorekeeping of council versus the mayor, who's up, who's down, and try and focus more on the broad agenda of moving the city forward and doing my part to make sure that I leave the city in a better place than I found it.
I want to give a shout out to Venture Forth and all of the entrepreneurs and small businesses here by asking a question about that issue. What would you do to encourage small business growth and startups in the city?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about jobs, it's easy to talk about tax reform and then creating a city that's not necessarily the lowest tax city, but a competitive environment. But we also should be talking about small business, because those are the big jobs. They bring in 500 jobs and X amount of tax revenue, and I think we obviously have to compete for that. But I also think that the city, commercial corridors all across our city deserve investment. I think that the Office of Small Business needs an infusion of energy so that we streamline what's necessary to start small businesses, so that if you've been given a gift of baking, then you're baking and not standing in line down at L&I trying to get the proper licenses. That if you want to start a tech startup, that the government get out of the way and help you achieve it. The model's a little bit different now. No longer are we asking folks to be engaged in government because you need government. I'm asking folks to get engaged with government because government needs you. So many of the different challenges that we as a city face will be solved by the tech community. One of the creative ideas that we're contemplating now, and we'll find some way to put it on paper for everybody, but the idea of incentivizing the tech community to come up with a way of collecting delinquent taxes, but in a way that prioritizes folks that are out of state first, out of Philadelphia second, then high net worth individuals third, and then ultimately down to mom and pops who aren't paying their taxes. But there's a whole lot of disrespect going on by people who have the resources to pay for it, and technology can help us prioritize that. We did something similar at PGW with, they called it, drawing a blank on the technical name, but it was basically a prioritization model. You use technology to understand people's payment behavior and patterns, so you didn't spend money going out to turn someone off just to go back out and turn them on again. You would just send a letter because you learned that that was effective, risk-based collection process. And so if we could come up with something using technology to help us figure out where to use scarce city resources to ensure that we're collecting the money that we can, that's something that a tech startup, somebody's hearing me now saying, that's easy. Well, then let's create room for it. So again, for small businesses and tech startups, there's lots of abandoned properties, there's a lot of vacant properties. It shouldn't cost much to find a place. The idea of cohabitation is one that I think works well. I think government should incentivize and create opportunity, encourage that type of stuff. I also think that when you start making a little bit of money, you shouldn't get taxed before you can grow, not taxed to the point where you don't have enough money to reinvest and hire other people and bring your product to market. I was able to visit, I don't know if anybody's familiar with NextFab, but went to do a tour of their facility. It was just fantastic, the things that are going on and the ideas that are being born. And they're all things that can provide solutions for the city of Philadelphia's challenges and attracting more folks here, expanding the tax base, and ultimately giving us the revenue that we need to be a growing city. I saw that.
Yes, but you know what? That was the first time, so that's pretty good so far. The city's pension system is less than half funded. Every single year, more and more of the city's budget goes to paying that down instead of going to things like schools and parks and all those core city services that we want. You told me regarding the city's pension crisis, quote, "I don't have any answers for all of those things, but I do believe that those answers exist." Again, shouldn't we expect someone running for mayor should have an answer, or at least some part of the answer about the city's pension crisis?
Sure, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to clarify Is that what? Oh, it's somebody's phone.
Hey Patrick, could you get that? I think that's actually the timer. Sorry, guys.
It's your wife.
Pensions. I guess what I'm saying is that in a city that is the fourth poorest or the poorest city with more than 100,000 residents, it's difficult to figure out where you're just going to pull $5 billion out of your pocket to fully fund a pension. It's difficult to come up with one solution that just solves for everything. I was in favor of the sale of PGW, not because I am pro-privatization or I think cities should set themselves of assets. I disagree with that, but at the same time, there's a cliff called pensions. And if we don't find a way to solve for it, we're gonna have less money to care for the city that's the poorest city in the country with more than 100,000 people. And so I do think that the way we solve for that is to grow our city, to grow our tax base. I think the way we solve for it is to redefine what pensions are. When pensions are developed, it was based on two primary things. One is the life expectancy of the pensioner and what we thought that the market would do. Well, now the life expectancy is a lot longer and the market's far more volatile, but we're still paying out like everything was the way that it was. And I believe that we have an obligation to keep the promises that we've made to people who have invested out of their paychecks for decades into their pension, but at the same time, we can't continue to go down that road. So I think, again, conversations with unions, all of them, to have conversations about it is how we start to grow our way out. But at the same time, looking forward to the future and all of the youth and vibrancy, the tech community, and all the things that are attracting so many young people to the city, if we can just get them to stay here, so they're not dating Philadelphia and then marrying New York. If we can just get them to stay here for just a few more years, then they start to live here. And if we can fix schools for them, they stay here. But so long as we have this churn at the bottom, we're not going to get ourselves out of it any faster than we got ourselves into it.
Two things that I'm seeing in this mayor's race, though, are a lack of specifics and no big ideas. And that's a comment as much about you as it is about the rest of the candidates. You are pitching yourself as the candidate with fresh eyes. Where's your big idea about the city?
Well,
And why haven't we seen more specifics from you?
again, I would like to say that I would just pay for it myself, but I can't. And again, $5 billion for a pension fund kind of limits all of your choices. And so I think the big idea is that we're not, that we're looking to the future for the solutions rather than, okay, so look at any urban environment, look at any urban city, and most of them have challenges with schools. Most of them have challenges with pensions. Most of them have challenges with public safety. These are issues that we hear about a lot because we're in Philadelphia and we're tuned in. I don't read the newspapers in New York or Atlanta or Baltimore, but I'm sure they're having the same conversations. And so as long as we're focusing on those 3 or 4 things, you're gonna kind of keep hearing the same ideas. I think the big ideas come when we say, okay, we got it. These are our challenges. I think the solutions come and the big ideas come when we start looking to younger people to be a part of the solution. When we start looking, not just younger like millennials 18 to 35, I'm talking about younger like there's a first grader somewhere that we can get to stay here if we just give them an education. That we have to kind of start back then. So the big idea might be reinvigorating the police athletic league and having a tournament for all kids so long as they attend schools. A big idea, because it keeps them out of trouble, it keeps schools safe. The big idea might be a longer school day. So the kids are coming and going home from school during rush hour. So as my family would always say, idle hands are the devil's playground. So now they're around adults going to school and coming home from school. The big idea might be, you know, taking an abandoned warehouse and turning it into an urban farm and giving it to the Food Policy Advisory Commission to find a way to get vegetables in schools. I mean, I don't know what it is. And when I say I don't know, I don't mean to say I don't care. What I'm saying is, I'm not the only one with ideas, and the mayor is never going to be. If the mayor is the smartest person in the room, he needs to find another room. There's too many ideas coming from too many different places, and if there's pride of ownership, we'll never get to them. So when I say I don't have the answers, I don't mean to say that I'm not gonna find them. I'm meaning to say that I will find them, but I'll get there by inviting as many people as possible into the conversation and then implement on those things. But I think it's gonna be common sense, low budget, easily achievable things, dividing the city into quadrants and finding a way to put some, farmers markets and feeding families and getting food there and eliminating blight. I'm not married to any one idea, but I do think that if you're expecting someone to come in with their with the silver bullet that solves all of the challenges, you're just not gonna find it, because if it was that easy, it would have been done already.
I'm gonna ask one more question and then take questions from the audience. What's your path to victory? You're the underdog in the race. Like I said already, at the end of last year, you had about $1,000 in your political action committee. You've said that there are over 300,000 voters between the age of, I believe, 25 and 45 in the city. But if the past is any indication, large majority of those people are not going to vote. What are you doing to boost voter turnout among young people?
I will concede that the numbers were low, but I should also say I wasn't fundraising during 2015, so to only have 1,000,
2014.
I'm sorry, 2014. Although I must say I was jealous. The city raised $7,000 in 4 months selling paintings. Oh man! but that's it. Here's the path to victory. There's a sense that young people won't vote, and we talk about millennials in the city of Philadelphia, and we talk about how many there are, and we also describe them by anybody's math, and we describe them as being excited. We describe them as being the smartest of any other generation. We describe them as being engaged, but yet we turn around and say, but they won't vote. I don't think we've given them a reason to vote. I mean, if they're calling me a child at 40, then they're calling millennials infants. And that's no way to lead a city. If somebody thought of me that way and never valued my opinion, then I might not offer it. There's 1 million plus registered voters in the city of Philadelphia. Consistently, we get no more than 30, even sometimes as low as 18% turnout. I don't think all of the 835,000 people who didn't vote were lazy or lethargic or apathetic. I think they thought their choices were pathetic. I think they've seen their lives remain the same regardless of who was in or out. So if it's going to be the same either way, I might as well just get to work on time if I go to the voter booth. So my path to victory is to get folks excited about what government can do if we get out of the way, or what Philadelphia can do if government gets out of the way. To go to young folks and say, I don't see you as the future leaders of the city, you're the right now leaders of the city. If I can get just but a percentage of those folks to come out, it is the largest voting bloc. So when you add young people, and again, there's 411,000 between the ages of 18 and 45, 411,000, they make up at least 50%, if not more, of a true registered voters if you scrub the list. If those folks come out to vote, this race is over, hands down, because I'm the only one who understands where they're coming from, period. Second thing, if you add in frustrated voters, people who have voted and given their vote, and I'm talking, older voters who just haven't seen anybody care, or people who recognize the value of their kids and their grandkids and what they can bring to the table. There's a lot of folks saying, if I had just $5 for every time somebody said we need some fresh blood and new energy in City Hall, I wouldn't have to fundraise. So at the end of the day, if these two groups, frustrated voters, young voters, come out, if they just lean in and pay attention to what the candidates are saying, I like where we are. I really do like where we are. Do we have to raise some money? Yes, we absolutely have to raise some money. We have to operate. But the idea that you have to spend $4 million to convince 185,000 people to come out is flawed. And if you think that that's the right spending ratio, then I really don't want you in the reins of leadership of the city of Philadelphia. It's the worst use of money. Most people who spend millions of dollars are spending it on TV. I don't watch TV. A lot of folks, the new TV is a cell phone. And there's all sorts of networks and ways to get in front of people. And until we have leaders who've gone out on the street and put shoe leather on the ground, shook a lot of hands, asked people to be engaged, and we're going to get more of what we've always gotten. My path to victory is young people, frustrated people deciding that they want to do something different.
Okay, I lied. I'm going to ask one more follow-up question. What are you doing to actually engage those voters, though? I mean, I looked at your campaign Twitter today, and I think you have about 500 or so followers. I mean, what are you doing? Are you meeting people? You know, are you going to their doors?
Yeah, no, that's the fun part. I tell you about all that stuff, and it's a little different, right? So we have our Twitter, the official Twitter account. There's 500 there. I can't seem for the life of me to get folks to switch over from my own personal Twitter page over to the official campaign, and so we communicate in both. So you take the 500 there, you take the 1,200 from over here. You got a little bit. We look at Facebook instead of slightly older audience, but you know, at the end of the day, we got about 25 headed towards 3,000 there. We're on the subways every single day. We're shaking hands. We're in the streets every single weekend. My son and I were in the snow over the weekend, knocking on doors. And just when you want to give up, because people come to the door and they don't want to take your petition, they don't necessarily want to talk. Someone will open their door and want to talk to you for 15 minutes because they love their city. So we're continuing, and most of our interactions through social media have been designed to get people engaged in voting. Because before I can ask you to vote for me, I just need to ask you to vote, just to be engaged, because the city will win so long as young people vote. Because if I had a couple dollars for every elected official who said, Doug, they're not going to vote, they're not going to vote. If they would vote, we'd be in front of them. What a trifling thing to say. But at the end of the day, it's true. And if young people voted and they didn't vote for me, then elected officials would be coming in front of you, asking you what's important to you all day, every day. And all of a sudden, conversations about keeping the city open later, or conversations about Uber X, or conversations about beer gardens or pop-up parks, all of these conversations will be easier to have because government will recognize that there's a young Philadelphia that expects them to do more. The tech community would have an easier time starting businesses and launching them and hiring people. But again, my job is to communicate to them how government can assist them, whether that's by doing something proactively or by getting out of the way. And if I can convince enough people, then that's my path to victory. And if I can't, then I lose. But you know what? I can't think of a better way to spend my time for the next 3 months than to try and get this city excited about itself.
Okay, we're going to ask audience questions now. The first one, should the city sell PGW? Good question.
I am not in favor of privatization as a general rule, but I am in favor of considering, okay, so if you have a house that's in disrepair, it's falling apart, windows are leaking, water everywhere, the plumbing is shot, the electricity is bad, the heater doesn't work, and you have a Picasso on your wall, what do? You sell Picasso. You have to. Not because you don't like Picasso, you don't like artwork, but you have some more pressing needs in front of you. Right now, I think the city of Philadelphia had an opportunity to sell the gas works. It did not. I think it deserved discussion. I think it deserved a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. But ultimately, I can't say that I'm going to jump into office and the first thing I'm going to do is try and sell PGW. But I'm going to go in and say, how do we find money to fund our schools? And how do we create jobs? And if that's something that's worth considering, again, I'm certainly for it. But if city council or other folks have other ways of finding a way to fund our schools, then I'm certainly willing to consider that as well. But again, we have to get our priorities straight. We have to fund our schools first, and we have to let everything be on the table until we find a solution for that.
Another great question. How will you attract and retain young people, recent grads, and young families in Philadelphia?
For me, it's embracing the entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of young folks come to the city. They choose the city because of our colleges and our universities. That's true. The academic rigor and the curriculum at these schools invite young folks here by the scores. But I also believe that they pick Philadelphia because of other things, like access to planes, trains, automobiles, nightlife, restaurants, arts, culture, sports teams. There's a lot of reasons why folks come to Philadelphia, young folks, and they have fun. Part of what we need to do to retain them is to create an environment where they want to stay. And I think that there's two primary moments where young people decide they're going to leave. One is if they can't find employment, meaning someone hires them, or we don't create an environment where their business can grow, the entrepreneurial side. So if they can't do one of those two things, they kind of say, okay, I'm gonna go make my money somewhere, somehow, and then they leave. If we do solve for the first part, and we don't solve for schools by the time they have kids, that's the second time. So I'm guessing, but it's about a 7 to 10 year cycle between the two. And we keep losing that opportunity. It's not a promise, it's an opportunity. So keeping young folks here is by showing them that we will do our part to allow you to be successful here. We won't tax you before you grow. We will recognize you not as a, stay here for 30 years and then maybe you can run for some office, or stay here for 30 years and then maybe we'll recognize you as a critical part of the business community. I think our Chamber of Commerce suffers from being narrow-minded with respect to what commerce means in the city of Philadelphia. It's not just Comcast, no matter how you slice it. It's not. It's all of these startups, it's all of these commercial corridors, and I think that they should spend a little more time focusing on making sure those grow and let that be part of their roadmap for growth. And I think all of these things lead to a city where young people come play, but then also live. And that's the part that we often miss.
This question comes from Dave M. He put a signature on it, and it's a good question. It asks for specifics. If Philly taxes a lot and spends a lot, as you said, what specific taxes would you cut and programs would you roll back?
All right, I'll preface this by saying I'm not a tax expert, but I will say that we tend in Philadelphia to tax the things they can up and leave. And so we tax businesses and we tax wages. So people just go take their job someplace else or accept the job someplace else. And I used to say, hey, I'll work here and get a 4.5% raise and I don't have to pay the wage tax, whatever. So, or the business, and it goes to New Jersey, it goes to Montgomery County, goes to Delaware County, or someplace else. I would want to see a reduction in and this is consistent with what the Chamber of Commerce holds, that you see a reduction on the wage and business privilege tax with a dollar for dollar increase on the property tax, where there's at least a little bit of elasticity there because we're so undervalued with respect to the property values that we have. At the end of the day, if there was a program that I would roll back, it might be the tax abatement. It might be. Again, I'm not suggesting that it will be. I'm just saying that there's all sorts of ways. The question is, would people come here and develop absent the tax abatement? And I think that they might, especially because, again, there's so many reasons to be here other than the taxes or the tax abatement. And so, again, that's my general mindset on the taxes. I think that we were going down the road of reducing those taxes. We hit the bump called economic recession, but we're past that, it appears, and we have an opportunity to begin again those reductions and help make Philadelphia a little more competitive. The Chamber was in favor of selling PGW. They thought that the proceeds should go to quickly accelerating the business privilege tax. And that was their way of making Philadelphia more competitive. I made a point of departure with them on that because I believe that I dumped that money in the schools because that's another way of making Philadelphia competitive. I think tax structure is but one of the reasons why businesses choose to be in a particular location, but the vibrancy of the community and the customers that they have and those sorts of things, the schools are major reasons why people come and a major reason why people leave. And so what tax structure looks like, again, I would try and make it focused on taxing things that can't just up and leave, and that makes for a stronger Philadelphia. Beyond that, I can't get into specifics because I'm not the expert, but I'd certainly do my best to have the most progressive, forward-thinking thought leaders on tax reform around me as we put those policies in place.
Okay, what practical impacts can you have on the school district as mayor? And what won't you be able to do?
Well, there's a lot of things that a mayor can't do. I mean, we can see that so much of what happens with our school district is driven by what happens in Harrisburg. But I do think that the mayor has a wonderful bully pulpit and can draw the broad outlines of what we want to accomplish with the schools from the mayor's office. One of the things I've been in favor of is sort of shifting the proportion on the School Reform Commission and how it's lined up right now. It's 2 appointed by the mayor, 3 by the governor. And what that means is that the school superintendent is always kind of looking to see who's his boss, where does he take direction from. And I think alignment of purpose something that would be very helpful to make sure that the superintendent of schools, the SRC, the mayor, city council, communities are all on the same page with respect to what they want to accomplish. But here's something that I think that I can do different than anybody else as a mayor. I think I have a better ability to talk directly to the students in the school district, to be an example, something tangible that they can see. They can see somebody that comes from the same environment that they came from, that has gotten to, and that they can still envision, they can still see the steps. It's like walking in the snow. After long, it just gets covered up and you can't see how somebody got from where they are to where they were to where they are now. But for me, it's still a very clear path for them. And I would seek to speak to students directly, to go in there and talk to their parents directly, to share my story with them and show that you can come from the worst neighborhood in Philadelphia. Mine was Happy Hollow Playground, but that you can achieve and you can aspire, and you need only decide that that's what you want to do. Our job and my commitment to those students will be that I will fall down on my face to see them be successful. And I will compromise my agenda and any other number of fronts to be successful for schools first, for job creation second, and to do it with a mind for fairness as number three. And those things, they're a little intangible. You can't say how much, you can't put a dollar figure on that, but there's not a kid in this city that I don't think that I could talk to and convince that they just need to keep trying and to keep working, and that I would put together programs for them to keep them engaged and keep them involved. And I think that's a large part of it, me speaking positivity into the lives of these young men and women all across the city. And that's something that I think I'm in a unique position to do as a young American.
Where do charter and pro-choice education programs fall into your vision of Philadelphia education?
I think sometimes we get distracted with the charter school versus public school debate. I think a better debate is functioning schools versus not functioning schools. Because if I ask who was charter and who was public, it might be a 50-50 split in the city of Philadelphia. Maybe not, maybe 75-25 split. But if I ask who thinks that a failing school should be in every single neighborhood, nobody would raise their hand. Nobody thinks that failing schools should continue to fail. And when we look at the performance of charter schools and the performance of public schools, we see that they perform about the same. But one group kind of pulls money away from the other, and there's a fairness issue. So from my perspective, I don't have a problem with charter schools, and I don't have a problem with expanding charter schools, but my commitment would be to allow expansions only into neighborhoods where those schools are most needed. And for schools that are underperforming, be they charter or public, put them on a performance improvement plan where they know that by date certain, they must have turned around their performance, or we change management. I'm not a fan of closing schools, but I am okay with changing management because there's too much of a waiting list for good charter schools and good public schools to allow underperforming schools to continue to fail kids in our neighborhoods. So I do see them as part of an educational mix in the city of Philadelphia. I was opposed to the approval of all of those charter schools, most recently because we haven't finished having the conversation. I was pleased to see the Partnership for School,
Philadelphia School Partnership.
I'm sorry, PSP, put money up because they at least acknowledged that there is a drain. I thought that was an encouraging first step, but wasn't convinced that it was net neutral, as they also said they wanted. So from my perspective, I think it needs a little more conversation. But at the end of the day, if you're a high-performing charter school, I have no problem with you educating kids, and I don't mind parents having choices. But we've got to find a solution that works for every single kid in every single neighborhood, or it is no solution.
Okay, now I'm being told to wrap it up. So one more question from the audience. Considering the recent revelations about demolitions in Philadelphia and what we know already, what do you plan to do to control development and construction in Philly?
I think that as far as development is concerned, I'm a fan of equitable development. I see development happening in all sorts of neighborhoods across the city, and in some cases it's pushing folks out of their communities, and I have a problem with that. Development in our neighborhoods is good, but it has to be done with a mind for the culture that existed in those neighborhoods and people who have value in those neighborhoods. When you're talking about, and I think you may have been talking about demolition and safety issues with respect to demolition, I know that a lot of work's already gone into overhauling L&I, and I think there's some dueling plans between Council President Clark and Mayor Nutter for what that should look like. I don't pretend to be an expert on what the best one is, but ultimately I think the end game isn't on how it's configured. It's that people are safe, that there's clear rules and standards for what's required of demolition experts, that we are consistent as a city, not only in setting the rules, but also enforcing them. And so whatever the solution is figured out before the next mayor gets there, what I'll be looking to do is to ensure that the rules that we put in place are enforced. We don't always need new rules for everything. We can often just use the ones that are there to ensure that demolition and all other activities around the city are done safely.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the event. It's really great to see this many people here, and we're going to keep doing this. Our next Q&A is with Nelson Diaz, the former city solicitor, on March 4th, right here, the same place, with the same beer and the same food and the same beautiful people. So please come. Thank you. Thank you.
She was